Good evening, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Welcome back to Eating the Elephant on Facebook Live, where we talk about Hurricane Michael recovery. We talk about Hurricane Michael insurance tips, and we're back after being off for a week. I got to be honest with you, being off for a week and leaving town for a little while was good. Got to travel a little bit with my wife, and it was good to get out of town. If you have the opportunity and the means to get out of the blast zone for a little while, I would highly encourage you to do it because it's good for the soul. And I tell you, what was really even better than that was when we got back home, seeing all the green. It seemed like suddenly while we were gone, just for a couple of days, everything greened up. And I have to say, it makes the place look a whole lot better. I know we've got a long way to go, and when you're looking at a lot of homes and a lot of broken trees still, we still got some things to do. We still got some progress to make. But it does feel better, and it does feel good to see a little bit of progress. I got several things to cover tonight, and they're not terribly related, but they're the things that came up while we were gone. Had several emails and private messages, things like that. First thing is that I don't know that I've mentioned this but once, and I thought it's probably good to press this again. We're seeing some folks now frustrated that they're being delayed by their public adjuster. Have to be perfectly honest with you, almost all of the open claims that we still have in our office are represented. Most of them have public adjusters. Now that could be that the public adjusters are slowing things down, or it could be that they're just the more difficult and more contentious claims. I don't want to take a position on that, but we are seeing significant delays with represented claims. And I will say this too, one of the things that we found out in the past couple of weeks, and it's something frankly I didn't know before, is that you can have your insurance company in many cases write a check to you separately from your public adjuster. And we've had that happen several times in the last few days, where we had a situation where things were pretty well zipped up, everybody agreed on the amounts and things like that, but previous checks have been held up, I think, a little bit unnecessarily by public adjusters that maybe were a little overwhelmed or distracted by something. And we were able to simply get separate checks cut. You cut a check for, say, $20,000 to the homeowner and for the $2,000 for the 10% fee to the public adjuster. And that way it speeds the process along a little bit, and the homeowner doesn't have to wait on the check to clear the public adjuster's account and all of that, because chances are that check may even have to go after that to a lender. We don't have a solution to speed lenders along because, frankly, it's outside of our area of expertise, for one thing, and second of all, banks have all the money, and insurance guys can't really push them around very much, and we haven't found a really effective solution other than reporting them to the State Department of Financial Services, and the CFO's office has been somewhat effective, but there's some issues there in that most insurance companies are regulated by the state, and so the state has a pretty good bit of regulatory power and some influence there. Most banks are no longer state chartered. Most are nationally chartered and nationally regulated, and therefore the regulator that's most appropriate is a federal regulator, and that's a little bit more of a challenge for people to get to, and they're frankly not quite as responsive because they're not quite as close to the people. I'm one of those people that believes that government closest to the people is best, and the further you get away from a hometown, the less effective it's going to be. I think if you look at the lack of response from Washington, D.C., to either the recovery of our community or especially the rebuilding of Tyndall Air Force Base, I think that's proof positive right there that the folks inside the Beltway, other than a couple of our own personal representatives, we've seen really good response out of people like Mr. Gates. We've seen Neil Dunn be very passionate about it. We've seen Marco Rubio to some degree be helpful. But I don't want to get into politics. I just wanted to make the point that the further away government gets from you, the less responsive they're going to be. We've had a number of other questions, and less question than confusion, I think, about appraisal. I want to be very sure that everyone understands there's a very big difference between a real estate appraisal, which is usually a market value appraisal. It's, fair market value is the term of art. And a real estate appraisal is trying to determine what a home is going to sell for. If you're looking at an appraisal in an insurance context, it could be a very different value. You're looking to find what it would take to rebuild a home, or in this case, to repair a damaged home. Those values may have very little or nothing to do with each other. And let me give you an example. If you have, say, a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house out there on the beach, on the Gulf, let's say it's $1 million home or $8.5 million home. Well, a lot of that value is based on the land, and the land is not going to blow away. And frankly, even if it is, it's not something that insurance covers. the thing that's more important is what is it going to cost to rebuild the home that's damaged there, and that may cost $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000. And something else that people don't seem to understand sometimes is that it's often much more difficult and much more expensive to repair a damaged home than to rebuild a home. The parallel I give people sometimes is if you go buy a car off a car lot and it's $30,000. Well, if you were to build that same car piece by piece by piece, I've seen statistics, I don't know if it's true, but that if you went out and bought those parts and put them together, and that work was done by a professional mechanic, it would cost over $300,000. I think this is that's an extreme example, but if you think about what happens in your home, if you're starting from the ground up with a clean slate, empty lot, and you're going from ground up, that's a very simple thing, and contractors are very adept at that. If you have damage to your home, a contractor is going to have to, number one, tear out, haul off. They're going to have to deal with whatever problems they find behind the wall. They may find rotten wood. In our case, when we were having our soffits put back, you can see behind me we're doing work now. That's why I don't have any sort of backdrop tonight. But what we found is there was rotten wood around 2/3 of our house, and we obviously, while we're getting our gutters and soffit and fascia replaced, we're going to pay for that out of pocket. But contractors that go in and do work often find problems they don't anticipate. So in addition to having to deal with that problem and that sometimes delay, lack of planning, they also have to sort of build in an extra fudge factor because they know that they may end up with something that's unexpected. And so they have to be very careful. So to tear out and rebuild a damaged house can be much more expensive than simply building a new house from scratch. And I think where some people have gotten themselves in some trouble and not anticipated and not selected insurance limits properly is they look at something and say, well, to rebuild my house, it cost me $300,000 to build my house. That may be true, but a couple of things that they didn't anticipate that I think we'll all be better prepared for next time. Number one is to rebuild is more expensive than building. And second of all is in the current environment where prices go completely insane, everything costs a lot more. And so what may have been a $200,000 problem is now a $300,000 problem. Right after the storm, you may know that shingles went from about $150 or so a square to $400 and $500. The prices have just exploded. And I think that's gone through not just the construction trades, but that's also washed through the rest of our local economy. And I think it's going to be quite some time before we get back to any sort of normal. I want to issue some caution for you sort of from the insurance side of the house that I've noticed a number of insurance companies, some of which are ours and some of which that I have a great deal of respect for, are now offering to go ahead and pay things out, including all of the recoverable depreciation and things such as that. But in order to do so, these insurance companies are in most cases asking for a release. This is most common when there is a public adjuster or an attorney involved, when a client is represented by outside parties. In order to go ahead and pay out a claim, insurance companies generally will insist on getting a final release. If that's not your case, if you're still moving and you're generally agreeing on things, I think you're still fine to continue. I think without signing a release, it's going to slow down your process. That's going to be the cost for you, is the cost is going to be in time. However, I would caution you about signing a release because a release is absolute, it's enforceable. It slams the door on your claim. Now, you may sign a release just for coverage A, being the building, or coverage A and B in many cases, which is your building and other structures coverage, and then you can continue to negotiate your contents coverage, your additional living expenses, and things such as that. But even so, unless you're very, very sure and you're very confident in your relationship with your contractor and his scope of work, don't sign a release, because then you cannot go back if you discover something new and recover more funds from your insurance company. I'm not saying it's a bad idea always to sign a release, but if you're going to sign one, you need to be very, very careful of your situation before you do that. I want to come back to something that I've posted on. I think it's the only post really I've made since I got back from my little vacation. There was a news article that was posted in the News Herald, and it talked about the number of lawsuits that have been filed and this sort of explosion, I think is what they called it, in litigation in Bay County. And I think it's something that we need to be aware of. I think they buried the lead in two ways, however. Certainly there's been a lot more litigation. I can tell you from, I don't remember the numbers exactly at the moment, but last October of 17, our office filed about 24 claims, 5 of which were property or homeowner claims. Now, this October of 2018, which of course includes Michael, we filed nearly 1,900 claims. Now, if you have that kind of explosion in claims activity, certainly you're going to have a higher rate of litigation. And based on what they said, about 1% of claims right now are being litigated. Now, that number is certain to increase because there will be people that run out of patience or finally, having tried to work things out with their insurance company, won't be able to do so. But I have to say, I do think that's encouraging that only 1% of all claims right now are having to go to court. I think that's good. Having said that, there was one very alarming statistic that I think was troublesome, and that was that there were 18,000 claims that were open with no payment. And to me, I think that's an indictment of the insurance industry, because if that claim is open, chances are something's gone on, or that claim would have already been closed by now. We're 6-7 months out. And I think if it's still open and no payment has been made to the client, I got to tell you, I think my industry owes everyone an explanation for that bit of information. And I would hope that we can find good answers for you. And I would really hope that in the next 2 or 3 weeks, as we go about the Eating the Elephant series, I can find some good answers for you. I've got a question here from Ryan Anderson. Is there an episode specifically on recoverable depreciation and how that should be handled? Yeah, there's a couple. And I'm not going to reiterate recoverable depreciation here. What I will say briefly is, if you go back on our Facebook page, you can search through prior episodes. There's about 50 or so right now. And I've also flipped them over to YouTube. And honestly, while YouTube is not in date order, which is helpful for some people, it's much easier to search. I can tell you get much more of a description of each episode, and it's a much easier search for you. So if you go to our YouTube channel, I would say searching for recoverable depreciation or looking at the descriptions of various episodes is helpful. As always, if you have a question and you look at episodes of Eating the Elephant and you don't find what you need, call me. Along those lines, now that I'm back in town, our help desk, our free public help desk is reopened. I'm going to remind those of you that are not familiar with us and our agency in this series that we will provide anyone help that we can. We will do so without signing a contract, without having any kind of fee, without soliciting your business. I will absolutely help anyone I can help. The only limitation is if you're represented by a third party, such as a public adjuster or an attorney. I'm a little more limited in the help and advice I can give you because I don't think it's fair for me to step on an attorney's toes. But if you have specific questions or if you're a little suspect about something you've been given as far as professional advice, I'm happy to do what I can. I wanted to get one more thing out before we close up here, and that is that I've been troubled. I catch on Facebook, I'm pretty vocal, and I'm a big defender of my industry, and I'm a big critic of assignment of benefits. And as such, I do catch the haters. The AOB contractors and public adjusters and attorneys get on me pretty good, and that's okay. If you sell insurance for a living, you have to have a pretty thick skin. And I wanted to be fair as best I could. Obviously, I'm biased, but I wanted to be fair in my assessment, so I sought out people to tell me what they think with regard to fraud and abuse and bullying and intimidation by contractors and PAs. I have to say that I know that I'm biased and I'm seeking other opinions, and it's not always hard to get opinions that are rational when people's passions are so inflamed. So I spoke with a fraud investigator at a state agency. I talked to a supervising adjuster. Actually, I've talked to several adjusters and supervising adjusters at an insurance company. And I talked to a retired estimator who's now currently working for a contractor, but he worked most of his career for a public adjuster. So I think it's pretty easy to see. That's a pretty broad spectrum. It catches my side, the insurance industry. It catches the other side, the public adjusters, and who I would consider neutral in the regulator space. And each of them had a very similar opinion of this storm, and it was that they have never seen fraud and abuse on all sides like they have in this storm. All three have been in this long enough to have worked Katrina, and several other big storms. Two of the three worked Hugo, and all have worked several hurricanes in the state of Florida. And they've said that not only was this a big storm as far as power, you don't get a lot of Cat 5 storms, obviously, and we unfortunately drew the short straw. But we've also drawn the short straw in some other ways, in that I think insurance companies are working a little bit slower in some cases than they should, and there's an awful lot more fraud and abuse and gaming of the system. Not by clients, not by homeowners, but by contractors, attorneys, public adjusters. And I have to say, I'm going to catch criticism for this, but I think contractors and public adjusters deserve particular criticism. My industry is going to get criticism as it is, and I'm going to leave that where it lies. I do think that if insurance companies every single time paid every single dollar, that we wouldn't have public adjusters, for instance, at work. But I have to say that the overbilling that we're seeing from whether it's roofers, mitigation contractors, or whomever has been ridiculous. It's been obscene, and I think it's been fraudulent. It is my hope and it is my request of public regulators, those of you in Tallahassee that are charged with enforcing the law, I hope you will pursue everyone that has behaved badly. If it's an insurance company not paying what they should, if it's a contractor overbilling, or if it's a public adjuster that is bullying, intimidating, or otherwise simply collecting a fee for something they didn't earn, I'm going to ask you people in Tallahassee, the people that we've put over there, the people we've elected, and those that are appointed and hired by those that we've elected, do your job. I'm going to ask you very carefully and very specifically, pursue the people that are doing wrong in this storm. You have good people up here in the Panhandle, and I think, frankly, as a group, we're a little naive. In South Florida, people are a little more accustomed to misbehavior, and I think they're a little more, they're good at recognizing it, probably more so than we are. I'll have to say this too, in as much as I've seen some great behavior, I've seen some really encouraging signs, not all of those that are guilty are from out of town. I've seen an awful lot of criticism on social media of out-of-town folks, out-of-town contractors in particular, and I have to tell you, some of your own neighbors are guilty too. There are people in business that are taking advantage and they're profiteering, and I hope you will remember that. I'm going to close by saying this. If you have a good experience with a service provider, whether it be a contractor, an insurance person, an attorney or public adjuster, I hope you will spread that word. By the same token, if someone behaves badly, has taken advantage of you, or has not done the job that you expected them to do and that you paid them for, I hope you will spread that word too. Because what that'll do is the next time something like this happens, I think there will be a lot less shenanigans. I think there'll be less misbehavior. I'm going to cut it off. I realize I've gone a little bit long tonight. I'll remind everybody that our help desk is back open, so if you need help, give us a call at my agency, or reach out to us on Facebook or via email. Again, sorry I've gone long. I'll catch up with you. I hope everybody has a good rest of the week, and we'll see you on Sunday.